Have you ever felt that your ability to sense others, to intuit their pain without them saying a word, has become a silent pact with your own exhaustion? Carl Jung would say this is where a sacred moment begins, the instant when the soul realizes it has spent years away from home, living in the territory of others, and finally decides to return to its own center. This is not selfishness. It is the beginning of individuation. In this conversation, we will walk through, with gentleness and firmness, what happens when the empathic woman finally chooses herself. Jung observed that when the I spends its life accommodating expectations, the psyche creates masks to survive. These masks protect, but they also imprison. When the mask is removed, sensitivity doesn't fade, it matures. We transform the kind of empathy that absorbs everything into conscious compassion, with boundaries that sustain rather than drain the heart. To anchor this journey, we'll weave Jungian concepts such as ego, shadow, persona, and individuation, with a simple explanation from neuroscience. The brain learns by repetition. If, for years, you said yes when you meant no, your emotional circuits normalized self-abandonment. But what was learned can be reprogrammed, and the return begins with one gesture: choosing yourself. Before we dive in, here's a heartfelt invitation. If this theme resonates with your path, give this video a like. It helps us bring a more human psychology to those who need it. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your presence builds this community. Take a breath. Picture yourself walking back home, holding keys that were always yours: boundary, voice, desire, rest. Today, we will use them without guilt. Chapter 1. The invisible pain of empaths, when care turns into silence. There is a scene I often encounter in therapy. She knows what everyone is feeling. She can tell her partner is tired just by his tone of voice, sense her team's tension by the way messages arrive, read her family's mood by the way a door is closed. Her emotional radar is precise and precious, but while she reads the world with such clarity, her own signals become blurred. Hunger turns into, "I'll eat later." Sadness becomes, "I don't want to bother anyone." Anger turns into, "I'm overreacting." Slowly, the body begins to speak for her. Migraines, insomnia, chest tightness, a fatigue that no vacation seems to heal. Jung would call this over-identification with the persona, the social mask of the self that cares. The persona is not the villain, it organizes social life. The problem begins when we confuse the mask with the face. The empath learns early on that being loved may depend on being useful, kind, available. The sensitive child picks up the atmosphere in the home and adapts to keep the peace. In adulthood, this adaptation becomes a pattern, and the pattern becomes an identity. This is who I am. No, this is how you are right now. There is a larger self waiting for space. Neurobiologically, this being that way is reinforced by conditioning. Every time she says yes and receives approval, the brain releases little bursts of social dopamine. Over time, external approval becomes the compass. The problem is, the compass points everywhere, except toward her own true north. Empathy without boundaries makes the body function like an emotional sponge. It absorbs, saturates, and eventually burns out. This exhaustion is not weakness, it is a signal. The symptom is a call to return. Jung also described another silent movement, the shadow. Everything that had to be denied to maintain the good persona gets stored in the psychic basement. The need for rest, the desire to say no, ambition, sexuality, righteous anger. The shadow builds pressure. When the empath finally chooses herself, it's not uncommon for strong emotions to surface. Not because she has become harsh, but because the basement door has been opened. It's the house airing itself out. The crisis is not a defect. It is reorganization. Let's look at a simple everyday example. A highly competent professional, known in her workplace for her kindness and reliability, has been responding to work demands after hours for years. She takes pride in handling it all. Then one evening her child asks, "Mom, tonight will you be with me or with your phone?" Something cuts through her. In that moment, the psyche presents a conflict of values, caring for everyone else or caring for the bond that gives meaning to it all. This is where the call begins. It's not against anyone. It's in favor of something essential. Mini exercise. Place your hand over your chest and ask, what in me is asking for care today? Write down 3 signs your body gives when you're crossing your limit, e.g., tightness in the neck, racing thoughts, irritability. Note one short and gentle boundary phrase you can use this week, e.g., "I can't today, but I can get back to you tomorrow." Notice how each small act of honesty with yourself brings a sense of alignment. This is the first step of individuation. Recognizing that your sensitivity deserves a roof, a window, and a door, not an open field without fences. Chapter 2. Jung's Call, Individuation and the Crisis of Choice. Carl Jung observed in his clinical work that many highly sensitive people, especially women, lived under an unspoken contract with the world. If I meet expectations, I will be loved. If I refuse, I will be rejected. This contract shapes entire lives, yet it is never consciously signed. It is born from early experiences of conditional affection. The price of this pact is high. The soul drifts away from itself. Jung called individuation the process by which a human being becomes what they already are, in essence. It is not about constructing a new self, but about freeing oneself from masks, so the self, the deepest center of the psyche, can emerge. For the empath, the crisis comes precisely at the moment she realizes she can no longer continue living only as others expect her to. This moment is no small thing. It is a turning point. Here emerges what we might call the crisis of choice. The empath finds herself standing before 2 roads: continue with the persona of the eternal caregiver, securing approval but remaining distant from herself, or choose herself, risking guilt, criticism, and loneliness, but gaining integrity. Jung described this moment as disturbing because it exposes what has been hidden. Years of silenced desires, ignored boundaries, suffocated authenticity. It is as if the psyche suddenly declares, "Either you listen to me now, or I will scream through symptoms." And neuroscience confirms this. The brain has emotional plasticity that responds to consistent choices. Every time the empath says yes to herself, even in small ways, like refusing an extra task at work or turning off the phone to rest, a new neural pathway is carved, strengthening her sense of autonomy. Repetition of these small gestures transforms guilt into courage, until her inner compass once again points inward. Jung reported cases where this process accelerated almost explosively. He called it the acceleration of individuation. After years of self-abandonment, when the empath finally chooses herself, repressed contents surge up with intensity like a dammed river breaking free. This awakening may feel chaotic, but it is a sign of life. The psyche will not accept living fragmented forever. A symbolic image. Think of a seed that has been pressed under heavy stones for years. When it finally finds a crack of light, it doesn't grow slowly. It bursts toward the sun. This is the movement of the empath when individuation begins. It is not gradual, it is visceral. And yes, it is frightening because it calls an entire way of being into question. Chapter 3. The weight of guilt when saying no feels like betrayal. For many empathic women, the greatest enemy is not external judgment but internal guilt. It is a visceral, almost physical sensation. The heart tightens, the stomach knots, and the mind repeats familiar lines. You're being selfish. They'll be disappointed in you. Who do you think you are to put yourself first? Jung observed that guilt in this context is not authentic morality, but an echo of the persona. The sensitive child learned early on that being good meant taking care of others, keeping quiet to avoid conflict, smiling even when it hurt. That mask was rewarded with conditional love, and so, in adulthood, any attempt to take off the mask triggers deep guilt, as if committing an act of betrayal. He described this mechanism as a confusion between ego and self. The ego, identified with the role of caregiver, believes it will lose its very identity if it dares to say no. Meanwhile, the self, the deeper totality of the psyche, whispers, "You are not betraying anyone, you are rescuing yourself." But between the self's whisper and guilt's scream, the empath often retreats, giving in once again. In his clinical practice, Jung noticed three main forms of this empathic guilt complex. Guilt of betrayal, the sensation of abandoning loved ones when setting boundaries. Guilt of identity, the impression of becoming someone completely different, as if saying no meant losing one's essence. Guilt of worthiness, the belief that one has no right to rest, pleasure, or personal choice because one's value has always been tied to serving. Here, neuroscience helps us understand. Guilt activates brain regions linked to the social pain circuit. Biologically, rejection or self-disapproval lights up the same areas of the brain as physical pain. In other words, when the empath says no and feels guilty, her body interprets it as if she had been physically struck. No wonder she gives in again. But there is a way out. The pain circuit can be rewired. A simple, everyday example. Imagine a woman who has always taken responsibility for the household chores, even after a long, exhausting workday. One day, she takes a deep breath and asks her partner for help. He complains, "You've always done it. Why not now?" Guilt rises immediately. "I'm failing. I'm being difficult. I'm changing the rules." But if she holds her ground with firmness and kindness, over time the new pattern stabilizes. The guilt decreases and respect increases. Jung saw this movement as an initiatory passage. The empath learns to distinguish between guilt and conscience. True conscience arises from the self and brings clarity, not paralysis. Conditioned guilt is nothing more than an echo of old demands. Recognizing this difference is essential for continuing the journey of individuation. Reflection exercise. Write down 3 recent situations where you said yes while wanting to say no. Ask yourself, if I had said no, what's the worst that would have happened? Then ask, and what's the best that might have happened? More often than not, you'll see that guilt projects catastrophes that never actually unfold. Chapter 4. The Inner Metamorphosis, when the empath finally chooses herself. Jung described this moment as a psychological metamorphosis. After years of living for others, the empath who dares to choose herself is not making a simple adjustment. She is undergoing a radical transformation. Like the butterfly realizing it was never just a caterpillar, but always the potential for wings. This process is intense because it reveals what was hidden. Layers of self-abandonment begin to dissolve, and with them emerge long-buried desires, memories, anger, and the will to live. Jung called this phenomenon the archaeology of personality, the recovery of lost parts of the self. Imagine a woman who was always the peacemaker in her family. For years, she never voiced her opinion in order to avoid conflict. But when she finally chooses herself, she says for the very first time, "I think differently." The reaction around her is immediate. Silence, shock, even disapproval. But something inside her ignites. That flame is not arrogance, it is truth. She has not become someone new. She has simply found herself again. Neuroscience describes this shift as the reconfiguration of neural networks. For years, the brain reinforced the pathways of giving in. Now, every new boundary creates alternative synapses. It is as if the mind, once trapped on a single narrow trail, begins to open new roads. At first, walking them takes effort. Over time, they become natural. What makes this metamorphosis so challenging is that while the empath blossoms inwardly, her relational system trembles outwardly. Those accustomed to her constant yes react as if they've lost a privilege. A partner may call her selfish. Co-workers may hint that she's changed. Family members may feel betrayed. Jung noticed something disturbing. Many of these bonds only existed because she abandoned herself. By choosing herself, she uncovers the truth, which relationships are born of genuine love and which were sustained by the exploitation of her sensitivity. This shock is painful, but also liberating. It is as if life holds up a mirror. Look at who loves you for who you are, not for what you do. This revelation may lead to losing people, but never to losing yourself, and reclaiming yourself is the greatest gain of all. Symbolic example. Imagine a house with windows always shut. The air inside is stale but familiar. When a window is opened, the wind rushes in, tossing curtains, stirring up dust, unsettling the space. But it also renews. Choosing yourself is opening that window. The initial discomfort is the price of true breath. Practical exercise for metamorphosis. Choose one small area of your life where you will practice a new yes to yourself. It can be as simple as setting aside 30 minutes a day for something that nourishes your soul. Observe external reactions. Write them down, but do not judge them. Reflect, do these reactions speak about me or about the expectations of others? Keeping this metamorphosis journal helps distinguish real feedback from emotional manipulation. And if you are going through this rebirth, write in the comments, "I am opening my windows." Your words may inspire other women to do the same. Chapter 5. The Reactions of the Outer World, the Collapse of Relationship Systems. When the empath chooses herself, it is not only her inner life that shifts. Her entire system of relationships begins to tremble. Jung repeatedly observed this phenomenon in his patients. A single authentic no is often enough for bonds to reveal their true nature. For years, the empath served as everyone's emotional cushion. She absorbed tensions, resolved conflicts, and upheld connections that might never have existed without her unconditional availability. When she decides to prioritize herself, that cushion is removed, and the cracks begin to show. Jung called this moment the collapse of relational systems. The external reactions tend to follow predictable patterns. Manipulation triggers. Family members may say things like, "You've changed," "You're not the same anymore," or "You're being selfish." These phrases are unconscious attempts to restore the old equilibrium where the empath always gave in. Passive resistance. Close ones may withdraw, grow distant, or cool down the bond as a form of silent punishment. Open revolt. Some become outright irritated because they've lost easy access to unconditional care. It's at this stage that the empath confronts a disturbing realization. Some relationships were sustained not by love, but by the convenience of her self-denial. Individuation then exposes painful truths, not only about herself, but also about others. Neuroscience explains this shock as comparable to a disruption in the brain's reward system. The other person had grown accustomed to receiving affection and help without limits. When that source is suddenly regulated, their brain reacts with resistance, much like someone losing an addictive supply. That's why the initial reaction is often pressure or hostility. But over time, those who truly love will learn to relate in healthier ways. Practical example. Imagine a woman who was always available to listen to a friend's dramas, even at midnight. One day, She gently sets a boundary. I can only talk at another time. The friend, used to unrestricted access, responds coldly, "Wow, I thought I could count on you." In that moment, the test is revealed. Is this true friendship or one-sided dependency? Jung emphasized that this process is not about losing relationships, but about purifying them. Those who remain will stay because of reciprocity. Those who leave never had strong roots to begin with. Think of a tree that, as it grows, sheds its dry branches. The pruning looks like loss, but in reality it is renewal, space for new fruit, healthier shade, and stronger roots. Chapter 6. The Paths of Transformation. Archetypes of the empath's awakening. Not all empathic women walk the journey in the same way. Jung observed that although the starting point is often similar, years of self-abandonment, the passage into individuation can unfold in distinct patterns, almost like archetypes of metamorphosis. Each path carries its own pains, but also its wisdom. 1. The boundary builder. This empath awakens slowly. She realizes little by little that she needs to put herself first, but she doesn't break away all at once. She begins to construct small, conscious boundaries, learning to say, "I can't today," starting to choose more carefully where she invests her energy. Her growth is gradual and less threatening to those around her. The advantage? She preserves more relationships as her process feels natural to others. The challenge? She still wrestles with the temptation to slip back into her old pattern. 2. The crisis catalyst. Here, the transformation is abrupt. A striking event, burnout, a breakup, a diagnosis, forces the empath to choose herself immediately. There's no time to prepare others. It is as if her persona collapses overnight. This path generates more drastic ruptures, but also an irreversible clarity. Once the mirror of truth is shattered, there is no pretending she hasn't seen her own reflection. 3. The boundary specialist. This empath learns the art of emotional discernment. She discovers how to feel others without confusing herself with them. She distinguishes what belongs to her and what belongs to the other, offering support without dissolving. Jung described this stage as a form of psychological mastery. The empath keeps her sensitivity, but now with protective membranes. Her presence becomes even more powerful, precisely because it no longer drains her with every encounter. 4. The authentic integrator. This is the pinnacle of the process. The integrator lives in harmony with both her sensitivity and her boundaries. She no longer needs to defend herself rigidly because she knows empathy and self-respect are not opposites. They nourish each other. She hasn't lost her essence. On the contrary, she feels more empathetic than ever because she is no longer depleted. Her love is sustainable because it springs from abundance, not exhaustion. Imagine 4 different flowers, all growing from the same garden. Some rise slowly, others bloom after a storm, some need support stakes, and others open in full balance. None is better than the other. Each fulfills its own form. So it is with the empath's paths, diverse, but all leading toward authenticity. Chapter 7. Integration and the Return to Wholeness. How to Unite Empathy and Self-Respect. Jung reminds us that individuation is not about abandoning parts of yourself, but reconciling them into a greater whole. For the empath, this means learning that sensitivity and boundaries are not opposites. They are allies. The mistake of the past was never feeling too much, but feeling without structure. True transformation happens when the empath realizes she can love without draining herself, care without losing herself, be available without being endlessly accessible. Integration doesn't cancel empathy, it purifies it. It's like transforming a river that once flooded everything into a steady stream that irrigates the soil in balance. This stage brings 3 central achievements: conscious empathy, the ability to choose when to enter another's emotional field and when to remain anchored in herself; authentic voice, the freedom to express opinions, desires, and boundaries without fear of rejection. The empath discovers that her voice is also a form of care, because real relationships require sincerity. Renewed relationships. After the collapse of ties based on exploitation, new bonds of reciprocity emerge. The empath realizes she no longer has to carry the weight of the world, because now she connects with those who walk beside her, not on her back. In clinical practice, Jung called this stage integration of the self, the reconnection with the totality of the psyche. The shadow is no longer an enemy but a source of energy. The persona is no longer a prison but a social tool used consciously. The ego stops being a tyrant and becomes a servant of the self. Imagine a harp. If its strings are too loose, it produces no music. If they're too tight, they snap. But when they find the right tension, they create harmony. That is the life of the integrated empath. Each well-adjusted boundary becomes a tuned string in the music of her soul. From a neuroscientific perspective, this integration corresponds to a state of coherence. Heart, brain, and body enter into sync. The nervous system, once hyperactivated by the anxiety of pleasing, finally finds regulation. The empath feels peace, not because the world has changed, but because her relationship with herself has. If you are longing for or already walking the path of integration, write in the comments, "I am learning to live in harmony with myself." Your words will show other women that integration is possible and profoundly transformative. And if this video touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share it with a friend who also needs to choose herself. Together, we create a current of empaths awakening side by side. This is Jung's call to become whole. And your individuation begins now.